Hello, my name is Dean Kahn. Today I'm going to talk to you guys about non-governmental organizations' role in disasters. So, what are non-governmental organizations, otherwise known as NGOs? They're organizations that are nonprofit, voluntary, and independent of government, and engage in activities concerning various societal and developmental issues. Subtypes of NGOs include private voluntary organizations, which receive some of their money from private donors or private donor sources, international organizations, which have a global presence and influence, donor agencies, which are agencies that provide financial and material resources to humanitarian efforts, so they also give money to other NGOs, citizens, sometimes even governments, coordinating agencies, which are agencies that organize other NGOs and suggest which NGOs should be dispersed based off of the disaster or event happening. So now that we know what NGOs are, what are their roles in a disaster? They can be broken up into three subsets: pre-disaster, during disaster, and post-disaster roles. Pre-disaster roles are training and building your NGO staff, setting up information channels, setting up advocacy and planning units, establishing regular contact with control rooms for the disaster. During disaster roles are warning target groups within a disaster through established channels, aiding the government in the dissemination of warning information, rescue and first aid, the allocation of needed materials such as food, water, and medicine, maintaining hygiene and sanitation during a disaster, and assessing damage following a disaster. Post-disaster roles are the technical and material aid in reconstruction, assistance to victims seeking financial aid, and monitoring the recovery efforts in post-disaster environments. So now that we know these things, why are NGOs an important and vital part of a disaster response? For starters, NGOs can provide an alternative source of relief to disaster victims that can reach those victims more efficiently. NGOs work heavily with individual communities, which allows a greater level of flexibility in relief efforts. Additionally, strong community ties allow NGOs to utilize community involvement greater than the government during a disaster or event. Another reason why NGOs are important is because of the grassroots structure of the NGOs themselves. It allows for additional advantages in disaster response and relief. They can identify the most at-risk populations in communities during a disaster. They can also educate and inform communities on how to prepare for disasters and help communities implement mitigation policies. And they can use disasters to call for policy changes and higher levels of government, which create safer and more well-prepared communities. A final reason why NGOs are important is because of the actual amount and the specialization of their skills. So first and foremost, NGOs play a role as information gatherers. They provide greater accuracy in the assessment of disaster damage for the government. Additionally, the specialization of skills or trades within an NGO, such as providing medical attention or food resources, can be used during a disaster response and help take the strain off of the government. The large capacity of NGOs and the immense amount of funding they receive also allow for disaster responses to reach all impacted areas adequately and provide financial support to disaster victims. Thank you for learning more with NGOs about me, and I hope you guys enjoy.